You are now watching M.O.D. Entertainment. Make sure you subscribe and check out the playlist.
I grew up hearing gunshots in the late night. Ghetto bird, police sirens as a mother cries. Just another victim of the Soundbrown genocide. Locos posted, locked and loaded, ready to take lives. And when they heard the chief late, they would duck up out of sight. Like your car when the sundown, it was mission time. You had to stay alert, cause bullets always travel blind. We stayed posted, we stayed drinking, and we getting high. Marchando down the enemy's neighborhood as we ride. Put the hood, put the glica sample, fuck their side. No regrets, but the truth is no peace of mind.
G-File.
Now, right here in San Pedro, we have the oldest neighborhood right here in San Pedro. You have the Rancho San Pedro neighborhood. You know what I mean? That's that RSP LS neighborhood, or RSP, Rancho San Pedro locos. Their neighborhood is located on the west side of San Pedro, right there on the Rancho San Pedro housing projects. The project gang, and sometimes you do see it up just as projects, you know what I mean? That is also how they write it. They have different ways of writing it. And this neighborhood, I was told, that has been around since the 30s. Since the 1930s, I was told this neighborhood was established, and that they're roughly, they're the oldest gang in San Pedro and the largest as well. Roughly about 800 members. This neighborhood is large, you know what I mean? They with the business only. These guys, are heavily rooted into the community. Have their members, you know what I mean? Their riders. This is a barrio. When you think about San Pedro, this is the barrio that comes into mind. You know what I mean? I know there's several gangs, but this is the main neighborhood that everyone always thinks about when you talk about San Pedro. Because these guys are just notorious, homie. Giving law enforcement a hard time, dominating right there. These guys ain't no chumps, ain't no pushovers. You know what I mean? Even though they do clash with a lot of African neighborhoods as well. Due to the population right there. San Pedro, homie, like I said, it's roughly, a large neighborhood, you know what I mean? And they're, with several clicas, like the 3rd Street Pee-wees, the 16th Street, the Santa Cruz Streets, the projects, you know what I mean? Just several clicas, this neighborhood is with the business, definitely feuding with the surrounding areas, you know what I mean? Like the neighborhoods, within the surrounding areas, like Harbor and Wilmas and all those areas, you know what I mean? And this neighborhood, homie, it be on and popping right here. These guys ain't no jokes, ain't no chumps, you know what I mean? They will get it on and popping. But that's what's up with the Rancho San Pedro right there, holding it down for there. Shout out to all the homies from San Pedro, from Scrappy to Villain to Crazy, to Bam Bam to Chico. Shout out to all the homies from San Pedro that be holding it down right there for theirs.
Now here in San Pedro, you have the Vario Young Crowd. Young Crowd, yes, they are located in San Pedro. But here's the thing. They have no relations to the Young Crowd in Linwood. These are two different gangs that just happen to have the same abbreviation and the same name. They just didn't know of each other. You know what I mean? Now as of recently, they know of each other and tend to kind of like flow together. But it's two separate neighborhoods. You know what I mean? So they have no connection to each other. Now they just rep it like the same, but they're still their own individual neighborhoods. Now the Vario Young Crowd in Linwood is obviously much older. It was already established. This one's much newer. This Young Crowd neighborhood was actually started in the 80s, as I was told. They were started on 14th Street right there in San Pedro. And due to the San Pedro gang right there dominating and, terrorizing, all these young, kids, that were coming up right there. So they banded together to form this Young Crowd neighborhood, you know what I mean? And like I said, since the 80s. And like I said, this is a more smaller neighborhood, you know what I mean? You roughly don't see them up as much as, you do all the other neighborhoods around here, and they're not as big as their Linwood counterparts. But nonetheless, don't think that these guys are some chumps or some pushovers. I mean, they'll handle their business, you know what I mean? Shit, they made the news a few times as well for shootings and all kinds of shit, you know what I mean? Definitely going at it with the San Pedro neighborhood. Seems like them, just have, heavy beef and conflicts with each other. But this Young Crowd neighborhood right here is no joke, located on 14th Street, putting theirs on the map, you know what I mean, and holding it down for their section. But that's what's up with the San Pedro Young Crowd.
Now here in San Pedro, you also have the neighborhood VCO. Now VCO translates to Vario Calle Oliver. Um, this neighborhood is located obviously on Oliver Street. Right there in San Pedro is where where you can find this neighborhood. Roughly, they were always a small neighborhood. You know what I mean? They had been around. I was told that they were roughly around since the 80s. You know what I mean? That was roughly the time frame in which and they were more of a smaller neighborhood. You know what I mean? They were never a large, gang due to, San Pedro being like the more dominant neighborhood right there. You know what I mean? Um, and then there being also a lot of black gangs and stuff like that. Makes recruitment a little bit more difficult. But nonetheless, even though this neighborhood is not as old school as large as some of the other neighborhoods right here in San Pedro, it is still nonetheless with the business still be putting their barrio on the map and holding it down for their side. But that's what's up with the Vario Calle Oliver right there, homie, holding it down for theirs in San Pedro. Another neighborhood that you have right here in Rancho San Pedro, you have the Vario Leland Park Hood Boys. Now, Leland Park Hood Boys is a neighborhood that has already been right here in San Pedro for a cool minute, roughly going back to the 70s. That's what I was told. Um, and just like the rest of the neighborhoods right here in San Pedro, it was always roughly as more of a smaller neighborhood. I was told roughly about 60 heads. You know what I mean? At least that's what I was told. Leland Park, you don't see them up as much as you do as like some of these other neighborhoods over here on this side. You know what I mean? Um, tagging's really, you know, not their thing. But nonetheless, homie, the Leland Park Hood Boys are definitely with the business. These guys ain't no chumps, ain't no pushovers. You know what I mean? You come over here tripping, thinking that that you could just like set up shop right there where they at. I mean, they gonna let you have it. You know what I mean? And they are located right there with almost by the Leland Park. Through those back ends, you know what I mean? Around that area is where they be, hanging out at the Leland Park. That's their dojo where they maintaining and definitely putting their Vario on the map and holding it down for theirs. But that's what's up with the Leland Park Hood Boys right there. And here's another neighborhood that you have in San Pedro that has been already established right here since the 60s, 70s. But yeah, I was told that this neighborhood was established. You have the PWL neighborhood. Now, the PWL neighborhood translates to Park Western Lomas. And Park Western Lomas has no connection to the other Lomas. You know what I mean? Park Western Lomas is located right here where the Park Western Projects is at. You know what I mean? That's their domain, their dojo, their home ground. You know what I mean? Where they be handling business. And even though there is a lot of black neighborhoods over here, outnumber the Hispanics. You know what I mean? Because where they're at on the projects, you could also find the I think it's the Drew City Gangster Bloods. It's a blood gang. Um, you know what I mean? And in a few other sets you could find right there. But the Park Western Lomas still be holding it down. That's still their dojo, their domain. Where they get it on and popping. You know what I mean? These guys ain't no chumps, ain't no suckers. They're still up. Handling business right there, active. You know what I mean? They were roughly always regular sized neighborhood. You know what I mean? More of more smaller than larger. Than the other gangs around here, but nonetheless, I mean, these guys ain't no suckers. You know what I mean? They be holding it down right there and representing theirs. Roughly I was told it's like about 120 members, so decent size. You know what I mean? Shout out to the homie Chico, out of that PWL, and shout out to all the homies from Park Western Lomas that be handling theirs right there, representing for their barrio. Also, right here in San Pedro, you have the MSP neighborhood. Now, the MSP neighborhood stands for Most Peligrosos. Um, it was a tag banging crew that became a neighborhood. At least that's what I was told. I can't confirm it, but they write 1-3. That's what they say. That's what they put. But I can't confirm it. Roughly more of a smaller neighborhood. You know what I mean? Has only been around since the 90s. I was told about like 40 members. So roughly around there. One of the more smaller neighborhoods right here in San Pedro. But nonetheless, homie, that's what they write. That's what they say. You know what I mean? You do see the activity, the graffiti and everything like that. But that's what's up with the MSP right there in San Pedro.